high in the frozen Altai Mountains, far from any modern city, lies a small, unassuming cave, Denisova. In 2008, archaeologists excavating this site uncovered a single fossilized finger bone. At first glance, it appeared insignificant, just a fragment from an ancient human. But when researchers sequenced its DNA, everything changed. The genetic material didn't match any known human species. It wasn't Neanderthal, it wasn't Homo sapiens. It was something else, something entirely new. From that discovery, a name emerged, the Denisovans. They left behind no tools, no cave art, no symbols of culture, not a single complete skeleton. Yet they existed. They hunted, gathered, and endured some of the harshest climates of the Ice Age. And more importantly, they left a legacy, one that lives on, not in stone, but in us. Today, traces of Denisovan DNA are found in the bodies of millions of people, in their lungs, in their blood, in their chromosomes, particularly in populations across Southeast Asia, the Pacific Islands, and the highlands of Tibet. They are not just extinct, they are integrated. This is not the story of a lost civilization. It's the story of a missing chapter in our own biological history, written not with monuments, but with molecules. And the only reason we know they ever existed is because science had the tools to read that story from a single bone. The Denisovans challenge our assumptions about human evolution, about who we are, and about who we carry within us. This is not a myth, it's not a legend, it's data, and it points to one truth. The story of humankind is far from simple and far from complete. But piece by piece, gene by gene, we're starting to understand just how many others once walked beside us, and how many still live on within. Part 2, a finger that shook science. Buried deep within the sediment layers of Denisova Cave, archaeologists unearthed a small fossilized finger bone. At first, they assumed it belonged to a Neanderthal child. The location, the size, the context, all pointed in that direction. But when the bone was sent to the Max Planck Institute for mitochondrial DNA analysis, the results told a different story. The DNA sequence didn't match Neanderthals. It didn't match modern humans either. It belonged to a previously unknown branch of the human family tree, one that had never been identified before. It was a discovery made not through tools or artifacts, but through molecular evidence. This was not Homo sapiens. This was not Neanderthal. This was something else entirely. A distinct human lineage that had shared a common ancestor with Neanderthals, but had split off hundreds of thousands of years earlier. Scientists named them Denisovans after the cave in which their remains were found. With just one phalanx, one small piece of finger bone, the world had to rewrite part of its evolutionary history. The Denisovans had never left artwork or fire kits behind, but they left something more durable, their DNA. And it was that biological signature, preserved in ancient bone, that revealed their existence to science. This moment marked a shift. It proved that breakthroughs in human origins no longer depended solely on stone tools or skeletal reconstructions. Genomics had become the new frontier, capable of detecting entire species through the whisper of molecules. The implications were profound. If an entire lineage of humans could remain hidden in the fossil record until the 21st century, what else might be missing? What other ancestors lie waiting, not in museums or excavation sites, but in the data within us? The Denisovan finger bone was more than a fragment of anatomy. It was a key, unlocking a door to a lost world of human diversity. A door that, once opened, would lead to revelations about adaptation, survival, and the complex web of interactions that shaped who we are today. Part 3. DNA Speaks, a genetic divide. Mitochondrial DNA was only the beginning. When scientists sequenced the entire nuclear genome of the Denisovan specimen, they uncovered something unexpected. The genetic difference between Denisovans and Neanderthals was nearly as large as the difference between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. This wasn't a regional variation. Denisovans weren't just Eastern Neanderthals. They were a separate branch of the human family tree, a distinct hominin group with a long and independent evolutionary history. Despite sharing a common ancestor with Neanderthals, they had been genetically isolated for hundreds of thousands of years. DNA made that clear. It not only revealed that Denisovans were different, it showed how different, and when the divergence occurred, it provided a timeline. It quantified relationships. It allowed scientists to reconstruct the past without needing full skeletons or cultural artifacts. What makes this especially significant is what it implies about our species' story. Human evolution isn't a single straight line. It's not a ladder. It's a tangled tree with many branches, some large, some small, many broken, and a few that still live within us. Denisovans are one of those branches. They survived in obscurity for millennia, leaving behind almost no trace in the archaeological record. And yet, their DNA endured, preserved in bone, passed into the genes of modern people, waiting to be discovered. Genomics has become a new kind of archaeology, a form of excavation that doesn't rely on shovels or stratigraphy, but on sequences of nucleotides. With each newly decoded genome, scientists can trace migrations, detect ancient encounters, and map the forgotten limbs of our family tree. The Denisovan genome is a reminder there is much we don't know about human origins. Entire populations could vanish from sight and memory, yet still influence us biologically. Through genes, they whisper their story, not in myths or monuments, but in the language of life itself. Part 4. Beyond Siberia. Clues from the mountains. For years, Denisovans were thought to be confined to the frigid landscapes of Siberia. The only confirmed remains came from a single cave in the Altai Mountains. But then, new evidence began to surface, far beyond that isolated region. In the Tibetan Plateau, researchers discovered a robust jawbone in Baishia Karst Cave. Though DNA could not be extracted, protein analysis and morphology strongly suggested Denisovan origin. Thousands of kilometers to the south, a solitary tooth found in Laos bore striking resemblance to Denisovan dentition. Fossil fragments in China added further weight. The pattern was unmistakable. Denisovans were not limited to Siberia. They were mobile, adaptable, and far more widespread than once believed. From the high-altitude plains of Tibet to the humid lowlands of Southeast Asia, their presence spans a vast ecological range. This challenges earlier assumptions of a small, isolated group. Instead, we're looking at a highly diverse population capable of thriving in extreme environments. These discoveries are more than isolated anomalies. They are pieces of a broader, emerging picture, one where Denisovans occupied a significant portion of Asia for tens of thousands of years. Their range overlapped with early Homo sapiens, increasing the likelihood of contact, interaction, and interbreeding. What makes these findings even more important is their context. Most of the fossils lack recoverable DNA. Yet through advances in ancient protein analysis, morphology, and contextual clues, we can begin to connect the dots. We are learning to recognize Denisovan signatures without relying solely on genetics. The deeper message is this: the Denisovans were not ghosts confined to one cold cave. They were explorers, survivors, and contributors to the genetic legacy of modern humans. The physical traces they left behind, bones, teeth, proteins, are scattered across mountains and jungles, waiting to be understood. Each discovery shifts the boundary of their known world, and with every new sight, we get closer to answering one of human evolution's greatest questions. How many kinds of humans once called this continent home? And how many of them, like the Denisovans, still echo in our blood? Part 5. Secrets in the Genes. How they breathed at altitude. One of the most remarkable genetic discoveries of the past decade comes not from a cave, but from the blood of living people. Modern Tibetans carry a unique genetic mutation, that allows them to thrive at altitudes above 4,000 meters, where oxygen levels are dangerously low. This mutation, known as EPAS1, helps regulate red blood cell production and prevents the health problems typically associated with high-altitude living, such as chronic mountain sickness, blood clots, and pregnancy complications. But what makes EPAS1 extraordinary is its origin. This gene variant is not found in lowland Chinese populations, nor in most other groups of Homo sapiens. Genetic analysis shows it didn't come from us. It came from them, the Denisovans. At some point in the distant past, Homo sapiens interbred with Denisovans. Through that genetic exchange, a small but critical piece of their DNA entered our lineage. For populations that later settled in the Tibetan Plateau, it proved invaluable. Those who carried the Denisovan version of EPAS1 had a survival advantage. Natural selection did the rest. This is not speculation, it's science. The Denisovan-derived variant of EPAS1 is one of the strongest examples of adaptive introgression ever documented. It shows that ancient interbreeding wasn't just random. It had real, lasting effects on human biology and evolution. The Denisovans, though long extinct, continue to shape our physiology. They are quite literally in our breath. Every Tibetan walking a mountain trail, every child born safely in thin air, they all carry a genetic legacy from a vanished people. This challenges how we define extinction. Denisovans may no longer walk the earth as a distinct species, but fragments of their genome still do inside us. Their DNA didn't vanish. It adapted, persisted, and contributed to our ability to inhabit some of the most extreme environments on the planet. What began as a fossil in a cave now lives in the bloodstream of a living culture. Denisovans aren't just a chapter of the past. They're part of the present, woven into the biology of survival. Part 6. Distinct Faces. Reconstructing the Denisovan appearance. No complete Denisovan skeleton has ever been recovered. We don't have their skulls, their full limbs, or their preserved faces. But science doesn't always need the whole body to paint a picture. Using advanced DNA methylation analysis, a method that reveals how genes were expressed in ancient individuals, researchers have begun to infer what Denisovans might have looked like. The results are striking. Denisovans likely had broad faces, thick and projecting jaws, large dental arches, and wide skulls. Their finger bones, one of the few preserved parts, suggested strong, robust hands. Their teeth were unusually large, with unique root structures not seen in modern humans or Neanderthals. Taken together, these features point to a physical form built for strength, possibly adapted to cold climates, high altitudes, or heavy physical labor. Denisovans were not just a genetic mystery. They were biologically distinct, with bodies shaped by environments very different from ours. But physical traits are only part of the story. Gene expression analysis also points to differences in immunity, skeletal development, and metabolic pathways. These aren't just superficial differences, they're functional ones. Denisovans had unique biological adaptations that may have helped them survive in challenging environments ranging from Siberia to Southeast Asia. This kind of research represents a new frontier in human evolution. In the absence of full fossils, we turn to molecular data to reconstruct the past. What once required a skull can now begin with a strand of ancient DNA. And yet, with all this data, there's still no face to put to the name. We can model possibilities, predict traits, simulate bone structure, but no one alive has ever seen a true Denisovan. They remain a shadow species, known not by what they built or left behind, but by what their genes still whisper. What they looked like may always be an approximation, but through the language of methylation and molecular biology, the outline grows clearer. They were human, but different, familiar, but distant. And through their DNA, they continue to shape not just how we live, but how we see ourselves. Art 7. Who they are in us. Denisovans did not leave behind monuments or myths, but they left something more enduring: DNA. Today, Their genetic legacy lives on in the bodies of millions of people across the globe. The highest concentrations are found among Melanesians, Aboriginal Australians, and indigenous populations of Papua New Guinea. In these groups, up to 6% of the genome comes from Denisovan ancestry. This is not speculation. It's confirmed by multiple large-scale genomic studies. But the story doesn't stop there. Smaller traces of Denisovan DNA are also present in East Asian and South Asian populations. This suggests that interbreeding between Homo sapiens and Denisovans occurred more than once and in multiple locations. The Denisovans were not a single isolated group. They were diverse, widespread, and they interacted with early modern humans across a vast geographical range. This means that many people alive today are, in part, Denisovan. Not metaphorically, genetically. The proteins in your cells, the way your body reacts to altitude, even your immune responses, some of these may have been shaped by ancient interactions with this now extinct species. It's a powerful reminder that human history is not linear or isolated. It's entangled. Our ancestors didn't just outcompete or replace others. They met them, they lived alongside them, and sometimes they had children together. The Denisovans did not vanish. They transformed, absorbed into the ever-shifting mosaic of human populations. Their bones may lie silent, but their genes still speak. In every breath taken by a child in New Guinea, in every heartbeat on the Tibetan plateau, Denisovans live on, not as a fossil, but as part of what it means to be human. They are not just a footnote in our evolutionary story. They are a sentence, a paragraph, embedded deep in our genetic code. And their presence challenges the way we define extinction. For if they are still within us, can we truly say they're gone? Part 8. Not just one group, the many Denisovans. For years, Denisovans were treated as a single, mysterious group defined by a few fragments from a Siberian cave. But recent genetic research tells a more complex story. The Denisovans weren't one people. They were at least 3 distinct populations, genetically different, geographically separate, and evolutionarily unique. One lineage left its mark in modern populations of island Southeast Asia and Oceania. Another contributed to the Tibetan plateau, particularly in the EPAS1 gene that enables high-altitude survival. A third lineage, genetically separate from the others, has been identified, but its origin remains unknown. Its signatures are found in traces of DNA, but not yet in any fossil. Each of these Denisovan groups appears to have interbred with Homo sapiens at different times and places. This means that the Denisovan legacy isn't the result of one isolated event. It's the product of multiple waves of contact across thousands of kilometers and generations. This discovery reframes how we think about ancient humans. Denisovans were not a monolithic lost species. They were a diverse, widespread population, adapted to vastly different environments, from tropical forests to high-altitude mountains. The evidence suggests these groups had been separated long enough to develop distinct genetic traits, possibly even physical differences. Yet all of them contributed to the human gene pool, and all of them, eventually, vanished as independent populations. The implications are significant. It shows that human evolution wasn't a clean branching tree, but a tangled web of contact and exchange. Species boundaries blurred, genetic lines crossed, and instead of one Denisovan story, we now face several, interwoven with the story of our own species. What we once called Denisovans may, in time, be reclassified as a complex network of archaic humans. Not one people, but many, scattered across Asia, interacting, evolving, and leaving behind fragments of themselves in us. They were not a singular mystery. They were a mosaic. And only now are we beginning to see how all the pieces fit. Part 9. When humans met humans, a history entwined. Homo sapiens did not evolve in isolation. As our species spread across continents, we encountered other humans, closely related but distinct. Denisovans were one of them, and when we met, We did more than share territory. We shared genes. There are no records of conflict, no oral histories of contact, no cave paintings showing alliances or rivalries. But the evidence is written in our DNA. The genomes of millions of people today still carry fragments inherited from Denisovans, markers of ancient interbreeding events. These were not random exchanges. Some of the genes we inherited had clear adaptive value. Denisovan DNA contributed to modern immunity, allowing us to fight off unfamiliar pathogens. It helped certain populations tolerate cold climates. It gave others, like Tibetans, the ability to survive at high altitudes. In short, Denisovans didn't just mix with us, they improved us. They helped shape how our species adapted to the world. What was once a survival advantage in the Ice Age continues to benefit us in modern times. This rewrites part of the evolutionary narrative. Natural selection remains central, but it wasn't always a solo process. It included moments of exchange, where traits from other hominins were absorbed into our genome and passed down through generations. These were not the sterile processes of mutation and drift alone. They were encounters between people, between species, and while the Denisovans eventually disappeared as a distinct group, their influence didn't. Every gene tells a story, and some of those stories aren't entirely our own. They belong to people who walked the same earth, faced the same threats, and ultimately left something of themselves behind. Not in stone, but in us. Part 10. Conclusion. Shadows that remain in our genes. Denisovans no longer exist as a people. There are no villages, no languages, no names passed down, no culture to preserve. And yet, they are still here. They live on in the oxygen-efficient lungs of high-altitude populations, in the immune systems of islanders who resist unfamiliar viruses, in the strands of DNA quietly shaping metabolism, bone structure, and blood function. They don't speak in words, they speak in genes. Every time scientists uncover a genetic advantage in modern humans and trace it back to Denisovan DNA, another thread of their story is pulled back into the light. Piece by piece, we're reconstructing a chapter that evolution nearly erased. This isn't mythology, it's molecular history. Denisovans disappeared from the archaeological record, but they never fully vanished. A part of them survived, inside us. Their presence challenges how we define extinction. If their genes continue to shape human biology, if their traits are still passed down and expressed, can we truly say they are gone? Or have they simply merged into the broader fabric of humanity? We are the final witnesses, not to their lives, but to their legacy. And as genomic science advances, we may discover even more of what they left behind. In our health, our diversity, our ability to survive in places they once called home. The story of the Denisovans is not complete. It is ongoing, written not in bones and ruins, but in the living code of our bodies. And perhaps that's the most enduring legacy of all. Not what they built, not what they left behind, but what they became, a quiet force within us, carried forward by time, memory, and evolution.